Where's, hey, you guys ready to get going?
Yeah. Sorry.
All right, so we'll call the meeting to order. Do we have any adjustments to the agenda? We have one, which is Neil and I would like to give an update on the NSBA conference that and delegate assembly we were just attending in San Antonio. Any others, Dan?
I have a couple of things I'd love to throw out. I can either mention them now, or we can wait till we get to them. They're short. We'll draft up what they are. If people feel we have time to take them up tonight, they are timely.
If you can get them out in a timely manner, let's just tell us what you're thinking of doing, and then if the group wants, we'll put them on the agenda.
The first one has to do with small schools grants, and they are being reformulated as we speak. They originally. The State Board of Ed proposed 15-minute transit time between schools, which would allow a school to qualify for a small schools grant. At the most recent meeting, they suggested maybe 30 minutes, but then there are some 7 other criteria that you will be able to apply, blah, 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 blah. It's a tiny portion of the ed funding. I think 0.002%. I believe that we should continue to support small rural schools with that percentage of our money. Anyway, that's number one.
So is that something you folks would like to take up and talk about if we get time tonight?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So we'll put that probably. I'll talk with Nicole, but we'll probably get squeezed in when she's presenting somewhere.
And second is doesn't need to be squeezed in tonight, but I would like to bring in again innovation zones up. It is a resolution which was passed by VSBA, and I am offering to work with anybody else who wants to. Nicole, I think it was you who suggested find out what it is, what regulations are holding you back, and kind of go at it that way, whatever. Anyway, I just throw myself out there. I'd love to work with people on that because we now have it as a resolution. Where does it go next? Throw that in.
Yeah. So Dan and I've had a little exchange on this. So what you're basically thinking that maybe we should create a subcommittee to look at what the innovation zones might look like.
And some suggestions from schools that are having some issues.
So just a conversation of whether we should do that or not.
Right.
So is that something people would like to do as well? Have a conversation about that?
That could be another.
Just not tonight.
Well, maybe not tonight. That's probably, yeah. I think the one, we'll definitely talk about the small schools. The other one, is that something we should put on the agenda for another meeting?
Yes.
Okay, I'm hearing enough
Yeah.
love, so we'll try to get that in on the
Innovation
May
zones,
meeting.
you meant.
Was that?
You meant innovation zones.
Yes,
Okay.
just a conversation about whether we should start a subcommittee for that.
Yes.
So we'll put that on the May agenda. All right. Nicole, Secretary of Education update. So I assume there's no more agenda changes?
So, Rebecca Holcomb resigned unexpectedly.
That's a real story?
That's Rebecca's story to tell.
Lorley.
You know, I think her letter said, had one telling phrase, and that is that hopefully the governor can find a secretary that shares his vision. And I think that speaks for itself. So there's been some back and forth. What I'm sharing with you now is the posting for the position, in case any of you in this room are interested in applying. So there was some back and forth. The governor sent a letter to the state board suggesting the education experience was not required. He was then pointed to the statute that says that the Secretary of Education must have education, expertise in education management and policy. And so I saw a follow-up story that said, well, no, we do need education experience. So the state board goes first in this process. Under the law, the state board recommends 3 candidates to the governor. And the governor can select from among the 3 or say, go back and try again. In the interim, the governor has appointed Deputy Secretary Heather Boucher as acting secretary. They are reserving the right to appoint an interim in the event the state board's process looks like it's going to drag on. Although, the state board met, they have the job posted, and they're closing the application process by April 30th. So that's not a lot of time. So we'll see what happens in terms of the candidates that they receive this first go-around. I would expect that if they don't receive enough viable candidates to pass 3 good names on to the governor, that they may reopen the search, in which case the administration may consider an interim. Because the deputy secretary has a whole lot of other things she needs to be doing. The 2 deputies are working together closely to keep the wheels on the bus. Shortly after the announcement, I was copied on several communications from boards to the governor and legislative leaders asking for a delay of Act 46 until secretary could be appointed. They responded. I sent that communication out last week with a joint statement. So as of this time, there are no bills in the legislature or any effort that I'm aware of to delay the Act 46 process. Rebecca presented to the superintendents at their all-members meeting, her second to last day. And she had several slides in her slideshow about what the agency was doing to ensure continuity of Act 46 implementation during the transition. So if any of you have an interest in seeing those, I'm happy to share that with you. But my perception was the agency had a plan to ensure they had scheduled meetings with folks that had submitted alternative structure proposals. Donna Russo-Savage and Brad James had been at every single meeting, and they were going to continue to be at those meetings. And there was, I'm not sure if any of you have met with them since Rebecca's resignation?
No.
Okay. So they were either going to have the general counsel sit in or the acting secretary. So I don't know whether it's Heather or Molly. That's the third person in those meetings, but that's how they're planning to manage it. So just wanted to provide the board with that update and I'll give you some time to discuss and ask any questions. And
Have we gotten any members contacting you saying that we should be asking for a delay?
no, I've just been copied on communications to elected
So no one's directly contacted you
No.
asking for that? Any questions about the secretary? Anybody interested in applying?
Everybody need a reference.
Go ahead.
So I know that there have been other organizations out there that have been, written letters expressing thanks for her survey. Have we done something similar, or?
I sent her a note myself, but I think that's something for the board to think about. Our last communication to Rebecca was one of expressing dismay
yes.
over the lack of the waiting study. So it might be nice to follow up with.
Do we need a motion to have Gio write a nice letter?
Just a nod of heads and we'll write a very nice
Could
letter.
we write a very nice letter?
Well, I do think it's worth capturing in the minutes.
Okay, all right,
If someone wanted to make a motion.
fair enough.
Well, I think it's important for the minutes to reflect that we appreciate Rebecca Holcomb's professionalism and commitment to the education of our students over the years. And she will be sorely missed by many. And I think it's appropriate that the VSBA board sent her a letter wishing her well. Do you need a second on that?
Clarence on a second. Any discussion? All in favor, please say aye. Any opposed?
Aye.
Any abstentions?
And if you somehow could, can we, like, I'd love to write her a note, but I only know her address as secretary of the agency, so if there was some way for us to be able to contact her, send something here.
I am sure that if you wrote to her
At the
at the
agency.
agency, they would find out how to get it to
Can I
her.
get a clarification? Was it a unanimous or was there a no? I couldn't, it was too quick. There was,
Unanimous. It was unanimous. Do we have somebody on the phone? I think
Phone
that
vote was
Yes.
the later.
yay came in.
Mark?
It was a yay.
I voted yes.
Okay, so is it unanimous then?
Yes.
So before we move on, I realized I made two blunders already tonight. The first is I didn't introduce somebody, two people actually.
Oh, yeah.
So the first is, and we'll go to the David over here in the corner. He's a member from what town? Is it Westminster?
I represent Westminster on the Union High School Board.
Okay.
Falls Union High School Board.
So he's a member, and we're not accustomed to getting members, but now that we have one, we'll have a member comment instead of a public comment. If you choose to address this august body, we'll give you a minute or two. Do you have anything, or are you just
So I'd
observing?
be delighted to give you a thumbnail bio. I was persuaded to run in the late 80s for the Westminster Town School Board by an educator named Claire Oglesby, which I did. After 5 years in Westminster, I moved over to the Union High School, Devils Falls Union High School District 27. I've actually chaired UHS 27 for 10 out of 11 years up until we reorganized in March, when I stepped aside from the leadership for the purpose of pursuing the leadership of the Wyndham Northeast Supervisory Union Board, which I was successful in. And it's as a result of the fact that I have, after 30 years, decided to look at these situations more globally, that I thought I would mosey on up and see how you operate, because I am likely to become a candidate for the open seat in the Wyndham District this coming fall.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Thanks for coming and checking us out.
Yeah.
Easy to find.
And so, but we also have a possible new board candidate tonight, replacing Ken Fredette. And I'll let her
That's a tough-
introduce herself.
Boy, don't look at me as a replacement for Ken Fredette, because that would be tough. I'm from Shrewsbury. My name is Adrienne Raymond. I was on the Shrewsbury board for a long time and chaired it for probably 10 years. Joined the Mill River Board, Union High School. So I was on 2 boards plus the Supervisory Union Board for 6 years. And then we merged under, not Act 46, we were I think 115. I always forget all the numbers.
153.
153.
Thank you.
153.
I know.
Yes,
Thank
you are red.
Yes, we are. So we have merged the towns of Teignmouth, Shrewsbury, Clarendon, and Wallingford. And I'm on that board. So I've been involved in our schools since my son was 2 and he's 29 now. I started on the nursery school, which was private at the time, and then also teaching ELF when it was ELF, before it's now Four Winds. And then just moved up through. We made our nursery school public when I joined the board. We've done a whole bunch of things, and it's a learning experience to have this merged board because it's bigger and less sort of hands-on. I mean, I was, my last thing at our elementary school was I redesigned the kitchen project and got all the vendors and did all that kind of stuff. You don't do that on a big merged board. That doesn't happen. But I told Ken I would step in if he couldn't do this anymore, if you guys would appoint me, and we'll see how it goes. I will not try and
Ken
replace
is no
him.
longer on his school board.
He did not
so
run
did
for
not
re-election
run
this
for
year.
re-election.
He has bigger
Word on the
plans.
street is he's running for state legislature.
That's what he said.
Try again.
Yeah.
He's on to bigger and better.
So we may not be done with him yet. So besides questioning her sanity for being involved in the schools for all these years, does anybody have any questions?
So what happens in a case with Ken? We don't leave a, right? It's not like, the elections usually are in the autumn.
The board can appoint.
Okay, so it's a board appointment.
Yep, and I can show you that in that
So it
bylaws
doesn't
here.
go back to the.
No, we can appoint to fill out the term and her
Yeah, and it
seat
would
will
only
be.
be till,
Yeah, only till the election. Yeah, Lori.
So a follow-up to that, are we doing the same thing for the second Bennington position?
I need to, and I have been negligent, but Melanie is no longer on her board. By bylaws, you can remain on the VSB board, even if you're not on the local board, until the next election cycle. And she was going to get back to me, and she has not, and I
Okay.
keep forgetting to get back to her. So
Because I did talk to her last night,
Okay, and
so far as to whether or not she was coming tonight.
Right.
and,
Did she give you any?
She wasn't. Other than that, I didn't ask her any further.
okay.
But
So
I'm
I will
happy
get back a hold of her and get a, do you have anybody in mind in case, if you do?
No, not a soul.
Yeah, it was
Okay.
hard. It was hard.
Yeah.
I was arm twisted with my hand kind of, trying to
Right.
dislocate my shoulder, so.
I'm glad they did that.
So now you know how to
Not-
do it.
So maybe we could work,
But we need
once
to
we get an
talk
answer
about it
from
for
Melanie,
sure.
then
So,
definitely
yeah,
communication to the region.
Then
is in
see
order.
where we need to go,
Right,
because
right.
I'm probably gonna need to do some
right, so I'll get,
face-to-face down there.
I'll get a hold of Melanie and find out what
Okay,
she's
that'd be
thinking. Yeah. So, no other questions?
So you need a motion to appoint this fine lady to
Yes.
the board?
Oh,
In person.
that's what that's all about.
Phone meeting.
So we'll deal with that in a second. Let's close this one out, and then we have yet another introduction. Well, she's old hat to me, because I've been hanging out with her in San Antonio for a few days. So, all those in favor of electing Adrian to the board, please say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Any abstentions? Welcome to the board.
thank you.
All right. I
you're
assume
not
Ken
sorry.
told you it comes with a free meal? Or didn't he tell you that?
He mentioned it. He was supposed to be coming with me, but he is again underwater.
And you also travel, and you also get your mileage paid
Oh,
for.
very cool.
So it's yours.
Big bucks.
Yeah, yeah.
So, I'll let you introduce her.
Okay, well, Sue's here. I'll let Sue say hi to everyone.
I'm Sue Siglowski. I'm the new Director of Policy and Legal Services, and I started on March 5th, so I've been here a little bit over a month. Been working, answering a lot of board member questions and over at the legislature quite a bit. I'm also working on some, helping a board with adopting new policies, and recently, last week, really appreciated the opportunity to attend the NSBA conference where I was learning a lot about school law and also Robert's rules and a lot of different issues that school board members face.
And we got the legal research team at the NSBA to provide us with some resources around Black Lives Matter flags. So we've got some good guidance in the works on that issue. So some good connections made. Sue's been fantastic. Really lucky to have her.
Thank you.
So besides being a lawyer, you're also a school board member, right?
Yes, yes. I've been a school board member for over 10 years and a chair for that long. I've also chaired an SU board and a merger study committee and been on the superintendent hiring committee. So I've done a lot
Last
of
night was at a school board meeting until 10 o'clock.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Full
Alright.
plate.
And you applied for this anyway.
Yeah.
I believe the quote from her interview was, "It wouldn't even feel like work."
Not sure
I might have to
that's
revisit
still
After a month.
true.
Well, it's been a lot of fun getting to know Sue the last few days down in San Antonio. So since we're there, because I forgot to actually plug, I said we'd have that in, but I didn't tell you where. So again, another mistake. I don't know, Neil, do you want to talk a little bit about the delegate assembly, your impressions of it? And because he was representing us.
Yeah, so I mean, going in green and not having experienced any one of these things before, it was very interesting. You know, I mean, they essentially go through the same process that we do as an organization in approving resolutions. Their difference is that every year, I think all of the resolutions come back up for consideration again, so nothing sort of carries forward year to year. The two hot issues this year were gender identity, adding that to the list of the discrimination classes in a lot of the resolutions and policies and beliefs of the organization. And then the second one had to do with you know, firearms or guns in schools, whether they be in the hands of educators or other folks. The gender identity issue did pass, so that is now included in the list of various discrimination classes now in the policies and beliefs of the NSBA. Apparently, according to Geo, 30 years of charm, as in it didn't pass in the 2 prior years. This year, initially, it looked like it was also not going to pass. We vote electronically, so the voting is rather anonymous at that point. You click a button, a little bit of time goes by, and then they show the numbers on the screen. You needed 2/3 in order to pass a motion. It failed on the electronic vote. A delegate from Massachusetts, I believe, called to divide the House, which then we got to raise our little yes or no paddles. And amazingly, that changed the outcome of the vote. And second time around, it did pass.
To publicly acknowledge discrimination, it turns out it's a little hard to do.
It's really easy to do when you're anonymous. It's a little less hard to do with by raising a flag. So, and it was, you know, I mean, it was intriguing to me to be able to look across the room and see those folks that decided to vote one way or another on things. I will say some of the discussion, you know, in some of the breakout sessions that we had regarding both topics were really interesting. To be able to hear the positions that folks had, and I think the one that really struck me was the delegation from Illinois seemed to be leading the charge that they thought it was appropriate, that they were opposed to discrimination of any kind. And they saw that the best path forward was to eliminate all the classes of different categories. So rather than singling out that we don't discriminate against blacks and we don't discriminate against male or female or any of the genders or any of that, that we should just eliminate all of the classes, and therefore we would just have it all taken care of for us. That argument seemed a little
Neil and I didn't buy into that.
Seemed a little disingenuous to me, although the delegation from Florida was right there supporting them. So that was curious. You know, I will say as far as the conference went, there were some interesting sessions and some not so interesting sessions. I think of more value was the opportunity to speak with other board members that were there, and some of the conversations that we had, you know, Geo being there as well. I think were well worth the time spent. So it was a great experience.
Anybody else who was there have Sue, Susan, and Nicole all went. Not for the delegate assembly, but they were there for there's about 7,000 people at this conference, so it's huge. And there's literally, 25 sessions going on each time. So you could, if you go in one and you're like there for 5 minutes going, oh, this isn't what I thought it was, you just go out and literally go next door. So you have, it's a big thing. And a bunch of us, a couple years ago, went to Boston. Who's all left that went down to Boston here? Amy did. That was it. We had like 12 of us go down, so it was a good crew.
So next year, the conference is in Philadelphia. So the board might want to think about, as it looks at budget, and we'll definitely look into this as we're preparing a budget for you to consider, you know, sending more people down. Usually when it's on the East Coast, it tends to be a more affordable option, and it's definitely a great experience, I think, both for the professional development opportunities, but also for the relationships that you form both outside with other states. We have gotten pretty close with our New England neighbors by virtue of attending these conferences, so it's a great opportunity. And if it's close, we should try to send as many people as we can.
Yeah, it's really informative. I feel like that this is my fourth and last one, because I didn't run for my board seat again. So I am done as of November, when my board finishes out its business. So, I feel like it's old home days when I go down there and see, hey, how you doing? You know, so it's kind of neat that you form some pretty good relationships. The one thing I will say to add to what Neil said, the guns was a topic, and in the end, when all said and done, the NSBA took no position on whether just local boards should determine whether you have guns in the school. So the NSBA is silent on the gun issue. We did take one vote that it came to literally the House tied, and it was literally, you could boil it down to, should guns be in the school, should guns not be in the school, and it tied 50-50.
Wow.
So we can anticipate that issue will come up next year, and whoever goes to the conference would be helpful to have some guidance from this body as to what our position is going to be on guns. Because I don't know if you remember last year, I did ask you guys, about the it's 2 years ago, I asked you about the gender identity thing, and basically this board looked at me and said, why are we even discussing this? Just, of course. Laura?
Has the NEA taken a position on guns, teachers having guns at all? Have you heard anything from them? 'Cause
I haven't seen anything formal. I know that I've seen communications on Twitter and elsewhere that would suggest that
it's
they do
probably
not
lit up, yeah,
But I'm not aware of whether they've taken a formal.
since they're the ones who would, be holding them.
Right.
So Gio, I don't know the timing, but were you there when all the things were happening in Vermont with people going to the legislature and the bills were moving through the House and Senate?
We were there, we flew in on Thursday night, we were there Friday, Saturday,
Just
Sunday.
wondering if people
Came
were
back.
looking at
Yes.
Vermont with kind of the fast-moving legislation that we have.
No, nobody was paying attention to Vermont. I told people about what was happening in Vermont, and they were
They might want to.
interested.
They might want to.
They're interested in that, but it's not made national news or waves.
Yeah.
Our president did stand up and, in front of the delegate assembly and let the great state of Vermont's opinion be known through Gio's mouth.
Yeah.
I mean,
I have photographic proof.
and for doing so, he did get several appreciative comments afterwards.
But didn't get any beer.
I think we're okay up here.
Let's move on.
Moving right along.
So appointments, buildings that are bright futures, Nicole?
So, Building Bright Futures Council is a legislatively created council charged with providing input to the governor and the legislature regarding Vermont's early care and education system. The VSBA has a seat on the council, but it came to my attention recently that that seat has been vacant for, it's not clear to me how long. I asked who our rep was because I had never been charged with appointing a rep. I know that Steve had done that. And a school board member was listed as a member. So I asked the executive director for a report on attendance of our representative as we have been navigating some issues around pre-K and others. It became clear that we needed to make sure we had a very active rep on the council. And that's when I learned that, in fact, that board member had not been, had resigned quite some time ago, and that the council was relying on Stacy Weinberger, who's a member of the State Board of Education, to sort of fill our seat. So I let them know that that's not, the state board is not the VSBA, and that we need a representative on the council. And so one of the thoughts that we had was that we would recommend Sue to be our representative, because she, as you know, is a school board member and is also a staff person whose time we can make sure that she is able to attend meetings. One of the problems we've had with school board members attending this council and other councils is it becomes difficult when they meet in the middle of the day to to make the meetings. So we felt like this was a good way for Sue to represent the organization, and I think with her legal and policy background as well, that's going to be really important to inform those discussions. So that's our recommendation, that you all make a motion to appoint Sue as our representative to the Building Bright Futures Council.
Do you want it?
Oh, yeah.
Just checking.
Or are you just the newest girl?
I don't feel like we're.
Hey.
Do we have a motion on that?
Roles and responsibilities.
We got a motion by Clarence.
I'll second it.
I heard Celeste first. We got a second by Celeste. Any other discussion about this?
I wish you good luck.
Thank you.
I'm quite familiar with the organization, and it does not surprise me that
Who was the second?
you weren't notified that we had a vacancy.
Celeste.
This was.
And if we have,
No, Clarence is the motion.
if there's a way for us to be of assistance, some of us are free during the day.
We haven't voted her on yet.
Well, I'm just letting her know so she doesn't resign before she gets there.
Any other discussion?
No,
All those in favor of, oh yeah, Laura Lee, you've
no, it's just really important. I think it's an important topic for all of us, so. That you're interested is excellent.
All those in favor of appointing Sue, please say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Abstentions? You got it, Sue.
Oh, thank you.
Doesn't come with more money, but.
I know.
Just more responsibility.
Oh, it'll be rewarding all the same.
Oh, yeah.
So the next agenda item is a carryover from last month's. It's really intended to have you start this conversation, not necessarily say yay or nay to this proposal, but wanted you to know that we received this proposal from Votes, and Votes is the group that administered the voting at the annual meeting this year. They, as you can see, have an interest in doing that in the future. One of the things this board needs to do before we even get into that is establish policy and procedures for remote participation. So if you decide that you want to move forward with a committee to work on those policies and procedures, then just be aware that we will need to have some sort of external group facilitate that. We do not have the IT capacity to manage that. So I wanted you to have the proposal, understand the cost implications, and then have a discussion about how you want to approach the development of those policies and procedures. You don't have to develop policies and procedures for remote participation. Your bylaws now just allow you to do that. I just thought we'd start that conversation tonight. You can talk about different possibilities for advancing that conversation or not, but because I had this, I wanted to share it with you all so you understood
So I
what
think
might be involved.
Yeah, the central question is, do we want some kind of system where we have remote participation at the annual meeting? And then if so, is this what we're looking for to solve that issue? So I think there's
Right.
sort of two questions. I wouldn't go into analyzing their proposal so much if we don't decide this is important for the organization.
Right. I just would like to be able to get back to them at some point, like, you know what, we're
Yeah.
not doing that, so you can move on to other.
Laura Lee?
How did it go using a platform like this at the national conference?
Besides the fact that Neil, I'll let you.
Well, just to be clear, that you can't participate remotely.
You
at the
can't
national
remotely
level.
at the
You have to
national
be in
level.
So
the
we're
room.
talking about remote as well as electronic in person.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. I think that the system worked. I mean, there was clearly one point during the meeting where the system failed to work. And it happened to be somewhat around the time of the whole gender identity vote thing that was going on. So it didn't instill a lot of confidence in the people that were there that the numbers were accurate and correct, which caused a rather large delay in the whole process. That being said, aside from that one moment of the entire day, the system seemed to work accurately. I would say, though, that I believe the technology that we were using at the conference is different than what we're looking at here. So while the concept may be the same, the underlying technology is different.
Technology or vendor?
Both.
Okay.
So this technology was used at our annual meeting, so.
And it was glitchy, but it seemed to be more
Only because the
broadband.
server they had couldn't support that
Yeah.
much, right? Isn't that why it was?
We were attempting to live stream
Yeah, it seemed like the
and
bandwidth.
vote at the same time, and so the bandwidth at Lake Maury had difficulty supporting. So then once they started pausing the live stream video, the voting went more smoothly. But it was a bandwidth issue.
Yeah?
So, I guess I felt that it was overkill at the annual meeting. There just weren't enough people there. We could easily have just held up our little placards or whatever. But I am curious though, has there been any indication that more people would participate if it was to be possible to do it from home? Or is that once a year, most of the people who are gonna show up can go to Lake Maury? I mean, that would be my guess, but I don't know that for sure.
Do you have a read on that?
We have not surveyed on that question, or, so I don't have a good sense of how many people would participate from home, but that's a question we could pose.
Celeste and Flora?
When I was working, even as a state employee where I would get community service time, paid time off, I could not take both days. And getting there is an issue for a one-day situation. So I think that the ability, and the more we live stream our local boards, the more feedback we're getting from people watching it on YouTube and emailing in a question or whatever after the meeting is over. So I think it's important that this organization kind of try these things out and encourage our local boards, which are gonna be much, much smaller. It's gonna be a different conglomeration of people at our next meeting. I think it's important that we try this, that we do live stream, and that we do this kind of electronic vote, because if I'm at home, I wanna be able to vote. I think that's important.
Yeah, I feel the same way, and I think we did get some criticism from some members about wanting to move the meetings to weekends, or being able to have more people vote, because there's not that many people there. And I think it worked pretty good. We had the media, didn't quite work great, but it was, if we don't start now, it would be really hard to move forward and get all the glitches done. But it would also come with, if we have something like what happened in San Antonio, that just the present members can vote, right, with paper, whatever, it's on the how we address the details. And then from reading this, the only thing, just because I've been so into the data thing now, because it's on the news all the time, but, part of this said that, they will want to request permission to use our project information for stuff, non-confidential data. I used to be more relaxed about that, but I would just want to know more about, more about that. I'm not concerned, but.
Don? And then Neil?
I guess I would request a couple of things happen before we go on something like this. One of them is to do that survey. And then when we do, if it comes that people are going to participate, then I would ask that, can we have a contract for 1 year to see if it really does work, or do we have to buy into a longer term? Because, I've been around long enough with town meetings, and we went to Australian ballot, and we went to Saturday meetings. And what I found was, and maybe I just live in a different area, what it does is give more and more uninformed people the right to vote on issues. And so I'm not against streaming and letting people know, but for people just to pop in, coming in from work and can vote on something that maybe we spent a half hour or session at the conference, makes me feel real uneasy. So I'm in favor of moving forward to consider it, but I'd like to make sure that it's really something that people want and will participate in a meaningful way. Not, I just VSBA and I'm a member and I'm really ticked off about this, so I'm gonna vote. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll echo Don's, and I'll add to that the experience that we had at the conference, where voting that was done anonymously tended to produce a different result than that was done when people know who how you're voting. If the service can somehow offer the two, then I think that might be something that we want to
And
consider.
I believe it can, right?
Yeah, so, they can report
Do like a roll
results
call
well, they get, so what they have are screens, what they did, they can project the results, so you could have the delegate name and the way they voted, projected up on the screen. Which could then be, if you're, we would need to talk about this, but I think the functionality of the system would allow for, if you're live streaming and you're watching from home, you can also see the results. We need
And
to
then I
figure
would
that
just
out.
add, as a tech guy, it does concern me a little bit about the bandwidth available at Lake Moore to support this.
Right,
Yeah.
so
I
what,
think that might be the limiting
right,
factor.
and earlier on in the conversation that we had with votes, when we talked about live streaming, they said they had the ability to boost the bandwidth. They had talked to Lake Maury, like they could bring their own device.
Booster.
Booster.
Doesn't
Technical
really work
term,
that
Neil.
way. I'd have a booster at my house. If I did that.
Don't you know?
It doesn't really work.
No objections, Don.
Yeah,
Okay.
anyway, so we can definitely pursue that question more directly. The information that we received from Lake Maury at the time was that they had the sufficient bandwidth, but, clearly it didn't, so.
Jim?
I was just going to remind everybody that you have to be a voting delegate from your school district to be able to actually vote, but the streaming, everybody could be participating. And I remember us having a conversation that we would sort of validate that. I think if people thought they could be doing that, we might even have more conversations at the board table in advance of the conference to consider the resolutions, as many boards did when they were sending voting delegates. So I think it is certainly worth the effort to see if we can't minimally stream, ideally, offer the opportunity to vote if they're fully participating. And this is another thing I remember, Don, from our earlier conversations, that we indicated that they have to be online watching to be able to pop in and vote. So even if they're the voting delegate, they
But you
have
gotta
to
be able to monitor that.
registered
You have to know when
as
to
such,
vote, you
and
have to
they
be there and vote in real time.
Streaming in real time, so, but anyway, I do think it's worth seeing if
Clarence?
folks would take advantage of it. I think, to Celeste's point, it's also something I think we might just decide is important as well for transparency and folks' participation in the process, even now that we have fewer voting delegates. Almost
I think we're,
as importantly.
I think we ought to do this because in lots of respects, a lot of our members do not have the ability to take that time off to come for the day to be there for the meeting. It's quite a lot to ask. Yeah, they probably can get their mileage or their registration fee paid for by their board. They gotta give up a day's pay or use a day's vacation for, and for some people, unless you're run your own business and you can get away or you can do your own schedule or you're retired, you can't just do those things when you're working. So I think if we make it more convenient, I think we could get more participation from a lot of our board members that serve on a board at night. That's their second or third job. I think we could accommodate them, and I think that's important to look at moving forward to get that. But I do agree that we ought to do that survey first to see if there is a thing, but because we are limiting the number of votes now.
So I'm hearing a general consensus that people think this remote voting is a good idea. I mean, I haven't really anybody expressed reservations about that. So there's a lot of moving pieces on this. Would it behoove us to put a subcommittee together to actually look at some of these moving pieces? I mean, how do we set it up? How do we make sure that people, I don't know.
So one option is for us to, this month, do the survey, and get that information.
Which I can't believe anybody's gonna say, no, we don't wanna vote remotely. So I'm not sure what that's gonna tell us, quite honestly.
If folks, yeah, so that's one option, or you could appoint a committee now, before seeing the results of, I guess what I need to know is, do you want me to do a survey or not? And if so, then you can,
I personally see this, that people are gonna say, yeah, we'll vote, we wanna vote remotely.
And how are we gonna evaluate it if one district says they wanna have electronic or remote voting? Are we gonna say no to that one district, or is there
Now that
some number?
now that we put let the cat out of the bag?
Exactly, I mean,
You know what I think we get out of it? We get the acknowledgement that they all said they wanted to do it, and if we have to raise the fees next year, they're going to understand that they agreed to it a little bit. Because this is going to increase our budget, at least to an extent, right?
Mm-hmm.
They told us they wanted this service. We're helping to facilitate it.
You know, I see a bit of a conflict here though, because if you need to be present real time and vote when the vote is happening, you still need to take a day off of work. You don't have to drive as far, but if the voting is happening during the day, you have to be there. And if we wanted to verify that somehow to make sure they didn't just pop in and vote. So that's another concern.
4 o'clock.
We met at 4?
Yeah, I just
sure,
asked
4.
Nicole, it's usually late afternoon we start.
Take a bit of time and do
Yeah, so it shouldn't kill your whole work day.
I would say that we really ought to start earlier because we never finish on time. And we're always rushing and pushing at the end, so. Just my 2 cents, sorry.
It might be, just keep going.
I would think if we do a survey that we want to indicate, if we were to have our annual meeting at 3 PM or whatever, would this be something that you utilize? But I have a bigger.
Put the time change in with
With the
that.
But I have a bigger concern before we do the survey, is that we get something from people at our location, that this really come to pass. It would be terrible to get everybody all excited about it and then find when we get down there, between the group we contract with and the people that Lake Maury, that they can't do it.
right.
And, you know, I like Lake Maury. I've had relatives who've worked there. I think it's a wonderful place. But I'm not sure they're in the 21st century with all of their
But
technology.
they were able to do it. The problem was just we had to pause the live stream. They couldn't run the live stream at the same time as the voting, which you don't really need to live stream while you're voting anyhow. So, I mean, I think they just had to figure that out.
Yeah, but it's gonna be even more coming in because that was just the people in the room. Now we're gonna have people coming in from the outside.
The people coming in from the outside are not gonna be on Lake Maury's band.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do they have fiber optic there or
They
not?
will,
They
but
will
they use a
because it'll
different
be
channel, so there's an
right.
outgoing channel, there's an incoming channel. Usually, it's that incoming channel pipe that's bigger than the one that goes out.
Right. Do they have fiber optic there or not?
I don't know.
I just think there's some details where we could do a survey, people want it, we get them all excited, then the day of the thing it flops and we're gonna look at it. So I think somebody needs to put their name on the line. The two need to get together and before we put money on it, say, oh yes, we've got it, worked out all the details.
I don't know if we want to do it as an iterative process. I guess we did try each of the pieces independently except for the remote voting last time, right? We had the voting as we sat there, and it was also live streaming, correct? So those 2 pieces were happening in October, correct?
There were problems in October.
No,
Yeah, so
understood,
I think-
but I was thinking, there's no other iteration between making a decision and not making a decision, frankly.
Again,
Because we kind of tried.
I think there's a lot of moving pieces here, and for us as a body of 20 to try to tackle this, there's too many questions, too many things, too much stuff we don't know. So I would love to see who might be interested in breaking this down a little more and be on a subcommittee to investigate this.
Can I ask what the
We might be able to meet just with the phone meeting and not have to come into a central location. I think Neil would be perfect, given his expertise in technology.
yes.
I'm not,
I'd love to
I don't
have
want to
Neil-
volunteer anybody,
Neil
but.
on the phone with votes to ask some questions.
I heard Kim volunteer.
Did you?
I was asking what the scope of the group was. Like, I would imagine we want to have policy, like, we want to, will this committee be looking at what we want to recommend to
Yeah,
either move this
I would think
forward?
so. I would
Yes.
think they would come back with us with the recommendation, yes, you know, this is the group we want, and we want remote voting, and this body has to decide ultimately, but yeah, they come back with a recommendation.
And verify, subcommittee also verifies that it would be possible to do it at Lake Maury.
I would think so.
Right.
I didn't even speak up that loudly, Dawn, but.
So Kim, are you volunteering, Kim?
I think she said that
I
she
am,
was
I'm fine,
volunteering.
yes, I'm happy to help.
Neil, you
It's fine, I'm
volunteering
just
for
gonna-
this?
How could I say no?
You could, and then we'll just take a vote, that's all we're gonna do.
We'll appoint you.
Anybody else interested in being on it?
You can appoint and fire right here.
What have you got, 2 so far?
I got 2.
If there's any other technical expertise people, I'd prefer that
I would
they
agree.
volunteer for that speak the language, so to speak. You know?
I clearly speak it with
Yeah,
my booster
booster.
comment there.
Except they don't understand our terms that we
Those for
use.
Wi-Fi, but that's
My
it.
kids are always telling me, hey, you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah, we
Well,
could
how about we
totally-
get your kids on the committee?
Anybody else be interested? It'd be nice to have 1 or 2 other
Louis
faces.
is on the board.
Louis, that'd be great.
He's a
And Floor,
technical guy.
Floor had her hand up as well.
All right, and
And Floor.
Floor? We're good there unless somebody else has a burning desire? And Nicole, obviously, you'll be part of that as well.
Or Sue.
Or Sue. Delegation, that's- there you go. So, anything else on that one? Is the food here?
Yes.
I heard rustling out there.
Is-
So we could,
I can't see it from
Yeah.
here, so I don't know.
It is.
Yes.
It is?
you wanna take a look, see if it's set up, and if it is, we'll break down.
It is all there.
All right, we'll take
All its
we'll
glory.
get going again at,
Oh, wait, can I just say one thing? We are putting another sort of piece of feedback we had about the annual meeting last year during regional meetings was that we should get a request for resolutions out earlier, like during the legislative session, when people are kind of paying attention to issues.
Yes,
So we
yes.
have that all drafted, we've got a submission form ready to go, and so we expect that to go out this week.
what's the deadline on that? Same deadline as before?
It's still a July deadline, so we'll do multiple reminders, but it's just
Excellent.
intended to give boards a couple of months so that they can put it on their agendas and have a discussion.
Yes, good,
Well,
thank
I
you.
think also with that comes the piece of it afterwards, where you're putting it out for discussion at the regional meetings and then giving the board a chance to react to it before the annual meeting. Sometimes there's a scheduling issue to get that in there. Boards don't meet in that time frame.
Right,
If you have a late regional meeting,
right,
you don't meet to do it. Some of them did meet and they discussed them fine.
right,
But other ones did not have an opportunity to
right.
take the vote on them, and where we're down to 1 vote for a supervisory union, they should have at least had an opportunity to
Talk about
to
it.
hash those over.
Yeah.
You aren't probably gonna have a special meeting to do that, so as much as we can push the dates back, I think it's very helpful, including the regional meetings that maybe they're already scheduled, but, or maybe you're looking at them, but if we back those up, even a week or two would help in a lot of regards.
You mean, not back them up, but put them forward in time?
No, back them up.
Back them up
So
so that
that
they're.
if we're going to continue to use the regional meetings as an opportunity to talk about the resolutions that are being proposed, so that board members understand the context and can then go back. So if you do that, the regional meetings are held earlier, then there's time for a.
Yeah, that's, so what I'm saying, I guess,
So shift everything.
when you say back up, I'm thinking calendar going like later in the year. It's not,
And booster.
yeah, so,
You're thinking-
so we're saying it's,
So he's saying August or October? Which, further back in August or
We're-
further
we're
forward in October?
Further back in August.
That might be a problem.
Well, not in August, but.
Because we start,
Early September,
we start
earlier.
right, as soon as we can in September, right after Labor Day.
Yeah.
So backing up's gonna start going to August.
No, we're not gonna do it in August,
Okay.
but we'll do it. We can look at the count.
But, well, your question was about, getting communication out now as the legislative session is wrapping up, so that boards will consider any resolutions they would want to put forth for the committee to work on in the summer.
Exactly.
Okay, so there are
Exactly.
2 pieces that we're talking about,
Yes.
clearances and this.
Right.
Okay, got it,
right, but they dovetail.
got it, they sure do.
The NSBA gave this, I'll pass it around, you can look at it. If you have any questions, ask Neil. Their state of the NSB Association, their budget and all that fun stuff.
Boy, Neil, you
But-
really,
The
what
only
are
thing
you
I'm
gonna
gonna
make
say
of
is,
them?
I'm just gonna pass around, we do our financial quarterly reporting on the quarterly meetings, which would have been March, and we were on the phone. So we didn't, if anybody has any questions, when we get to that part of the agenda, we pass them around because it was in last month's, but not in this month's.
So that's listed as being later on tonight. We'll
Yeah, it
actually
is,
talk
and
about it.
and if you guys have any questions, we'll cover it. It didn't, nothing was burning, so we didn't make the phone conversation in March, but happy to field any questions you guys have.
All right, let's get a bite to eat.
The minutes we were wondering.
All right, that was good.
All right, let's get rolling here. All right, so we got legislative updates, a lot of stuff there. So Nicole, lead us.
Hi, I'm just sending you all an email.
It's like my wife's office where they literally work next to each other and they send each other emails.
It's not in a legislative update though, we'll talk about it under my report. So, H911. So since you all met by phone, the House has passed H911. 6 days of committee work total on that bill, 2 in Ways and Means, 2 in House Ed, and 2 in Appropriations. And it's sailed through, I think the second reading, it passed on a voice vote. And the third reading, it passed with a handsome margin. It's been sitting in the Senate Finance Committee for 2.5, 3 weeks. And they've taken some testimony from the Joint Fiscal Office and from the Agency of Education. I don't know, if anyone listened to Vermont Edition yesterday? Yes, Tom the mystery caller.
Helps to have 2 aliases.
I thought it sounded just like Tom's on the phone.
It was me. My real name is Tom.
But then you didn't say Geo.
Well, if I would have said Geo, then people would have said, oh, that's the VSBA board
yeah,
president. But
yeah.
I wasn't calling on behalf of the VSBA, so I used my other name, Tom.
Yeah.
I loved her response. I don't know why they're so upset.
Right. So, I think what's important, so, the message from that radio show was, who knows what the Senate Finance Committee is going to do, you know? Representative Ansel was, has those talking points down, she understands the bill very well and articulated sort of the rationale for that approach, and Senator Cummings was far more uncertain in terms of where her committee was even at, but felt like it didn't necessarily hit the mark on being easier to understand, more transparent. So there's a few things for you all to, we have not been asked to testify in Senate Finance. I asked when we were going to be able to testify. I know what our 3 general points are. Don't make changes that impact FY19, don't move teachers' retirement, and don't mess with Act 46 incentives without hearing, particularly from the business managers in those districts, about what this is actually going to do. And by the way, let's try and understand how this intersects with the special ed funding bill and any other tweaks you're hoping to accomplish, because it's a phased-in approach. So we met with Joint Fiscal, as we were preparing to write the legislative report. So Sue came on the scene and tasked with explaining 9/11. And I don't know how many of you read the legislative report that sort of did a section by section analysis. But it's complicated, especially the math has become more complicated, particularly for the income ratepayers. It's not an intuitive calculation. The base education payment concept is challenging because I believe, the connotation is this is what you should be spending or this is the average amount, when in fact it's purely a number derived through a mathematical equation. So it's similar to the yield, which is already difficult to explain. But now we've added a yield to a base education payment and applying different calculations to different things. So certainly, when you think about standing up in front of your communities and trying to explain how they can calculate just even the property tax rate side, the calculation has gotten more complex. It's also more challenging to identify for folks in your community what the impact to, what their total spend on education is going to be, because some of the revenue is shifted to this income surcharge. So one of the questions that the Senate Finance Committee has asked is, we've seen modeling in terms of what this does to homestead rates and rates for income payers. Now we want to see what happens for individuals in these communities within different income brackets so that they can understand the total impact to individuals. When Sue and I met with folks from Joint Fiscal Office to try to test some of our calculations and our assumptions and more directly understand what happened, we understand what's happening in FY19. It's the what happens in 20 and 21 that was less clear in the language, and the charts and graphs don't clearly illustrate exactly what happened. So the message we got was that the directive was, for FY19, everyone's property taxes need to go down. Okay, so it all comes down to how do you adjust the formula in a way that assures everybody's property taxes go down in FY19, and then, but that's not full implementation of the model. So full implementation of the model is designed to have the slope at which every dollar you spend above the base payment amount is more expensive to raise. In FY19, because everybody's property taxes are lower, it's not a big deal. And I think some of the sentiment among legislators was, how can the VSBA possibly be against this? Everybody's rates go down, and we're diversifying the revenue sources. That's a fair point. And the question is, what happens in the out years? So what happens in the out years is the slope starts to increase. First it's 17, if you're spending $17,000 or more, you're gonna end up, your property taxes will be higher than they otherwise would under the current formula. And in 2021, it's like 16,000. So it sort of phases in over time, the districts that are gonna be bumped over where current law would have their tax rates. The districts that spend between 12 and 16,000 per pupil will have their tax rates lowered to a pretty, to a degree that they will not bump up against the current law line, at least not in the time frame that they've modeled. So there's excess capacity in those districts, theoretically, to begin to spend more. So for districts that spend at the lower end, 9-11 is probably pretty attractive. The question that I have is, when you look at the districts that tend to spend the most per pupil, they tend to be, and that this formula is designed to put downward pressure on, the districts impacted this year and next tend to be smaller, rural, and tuition-paying districts. I don't know if any of you saw the public assets piece that came out last week, but it's what I have been saying to folks is you're capturing the people who have no real control over their spending. So the cost containment on districts that pay tuition is either you're going to have them gutting the elementary schools, or in the case of a K-12 non-operating district, there is no room to contain costs because they have to pay tuition. When you think about the ed fund as a whole, the largest drivers of education costs are not the small districts spending $18,000, $19,000 per student. There are large districts that spend $16,000, $17,000, $15,000 per student. So if 9/11 as applied creates space for more spending in the larger districts, then we're going to be adding a lot of pressure on the ed fund in the out years. And so that's going to come with some political consequences, or some policy consequences. So we've just come out of 10 years where concern about K-12 costs has been pervasive. The House bill and the House leadership, I think, pivoted the conversation, and it was on the radio yesterday, you could hear it. The concern isn't about K-12 spending, the concern is about property taxes. And so 9/11 reduces property taxes, and so we can sort of ease our concerns, I guess, about K-12 education spending. But I think it's important for people to talk about the fact that if you've created a lot of spending capacity in the Burlingtons, the Brattleboro's, the Winooskis, that may be wonderful. Maybe that's what we want, but that's going to lead to, we're no longer, it's not $1.6 billion, it's whatever it is. We're not going to be slowing the growth of spending. So it's a difficult position, I think, for this organization. It may be that the governor's going to veto that bill, so we don't need to take any further position other than FY19 we shouldn't impact, and those other pieces make it palatable. But it is an approach that I think I want to make sure you all understand how it works. Because it could be that Senate Finance says, you know what, we can't come up with anything better, let's just do it. And let the governor veto it, and we'll see what happens. Or they could come up with something entirely new, but I wanted to make sure you all understood what was happening with that bill. Because you may, if you've contacted your legislators, you may hear back, what is the problem? This is a great thing for school districts, and it may be. But I believe it's a short-term, it's a political solution that has a short-term benefit that could have us all paying the piper. and unfortunately force a revisitation of the funding formula in 2 years. Because, suddenly the property taxes are right back where they were, plus people are paying an income tax surcharge. So, they may have any questions.
Orly?
How long are they, so when you're talking about that, didn't they present long-term modeling on that impact?
They presented the phased-in approach to full implementation, so it's a 3-year.
But they didn't present the modeling of potential growth in spending that would, no.
not that I saw.
You know, our legislators, and when I was one, but even before and since then, have criticized Act 60 and Act 68 because they said nobody understood it. So I think there was an expectation this year that whatever they came up with in the legislature, it was going to be easier to understand.
Yeah.
And what I'm seeing, the few people that I talked to or talked to me is, even, one fellow said, it took a decade, but I really, now when the business manager at town meeting explains Act 68, how it's I understand it. I may not like it, but I understand it. I mean, we're just gonna have so much mass confusion. I don't know. I don't even know what it's gonna be like to explain it to the voters.
There are a couple of things that I like about this though, and I guess I hate to see VSBA's stance appear too negative, because I like the fact that some of the cost is shifted over to income taxation, and I like the fact that income sensitivity remains. Income taxes by themselves are income sensitive, but even the property tax originally as conceived in the House wasn't income sensitized, and it is now. So I guess my plea would be that we not appear to be completely negative about this, because it does accomplish some of the things that I would like to see education funding accomplish.
I would have to say, on what Dan was saying, is I agree to those parts, but the problem is with newly merged districts, you're potentially going back and saying, so we promised you this, but yes, your whole district tax rate is going to do this over this period of time. But for you guys who had 5 years to go up 60-some%, it's tomorrow. I don't know how any merger member or any elected school board member can go and say that to a whole town.
Yeah, mine is, I absolutely agree. I think as long as we have income sensitivity, taking the burden off the land tax and putting it onto an income tax makes perfect sense to me. It spreads it out more. I think it's great. However, they are going too fast again, and we told them this when we met at Norwich. They're moving too fast. They're gonna make huge mistakes because they're in a rush to be able to say, we cut your property tax, elect me again. I don't want to be their political ping pong. I don't think it's fair to our schools, and I don't think it's fair to the taxpayers. They're not stupid.
So did you have something to say, Nicole?
I just want to say, just for your info, Taconic and Green has a little carve out there on the back 46. I think that's because of the forest funds.
Well,
but I'm not.
we did a little letter writing.
They
too.
did not. Yeah, but I'm not sure
Okay,
that
we
they
did a lot of
heard
letter writing.
from business managers, and so you and NEK Choice have some protections, but they didn't hear from everybody.
Well, that's the whole
Those were
thing. How fair is that?
You were extreme situations, so potentially they needed to take care of the extremes, but I think there's a lot of
people in
there in between, and I'm not, I can't say, oh, yes, it's fine, without having
Yeah, that
heard
covered
business
us, but it
managers
doesn't cover
say,
everybody else.
we've done the numbers, we understand how it works, and yeah, we're all better off for the next 5 years because of this change. That has not happened.
I think to the 3 points you laid out, Nicole, I don't think that those would appear negative, and it would maybe helpful to hear that we agree with them, like, don't make changes that impact FY19, don't move the teacher retirement, and don't make changes to the Act 46 incentives. Because those may all start with don't, but they, I think, are well received in each of us, despite the fact that's not the incentive I'm worried about losing. I'd be losing the cents off the tax bill that we were promised with our unification. The other piece I would say is doing such dramatic change while we are also trying to unify districts and see the benefits of that consolidation will make it nearly impossible to feel the effects of that in any meaningful way. And so, or to explain the effects. Like, we'd be in no man's land, and it is most certainly not easier to understand. And Martha Heath knows it probably as well as almost anyone. If you need someone to testify. I know she's been down a couple of times, for me to reach out to her and volunteer again because she's watching it closely. They would almost have to have an individual calculator to go on and estimate each individual's tax implications, and I doubt they're funding that idea.
So what do people think about what Kim just suggested, those three categories, the three no's?
I can think of other no's, but,
Well,
but those
no,
are
but these are the
wonderful.
bigger ones, so,
Well,
so,
those are what you gave me last time.
Yeah.
So that's good that we're, it'd be good
is
to
that
stick
still
with
where
that.
we're at then? Is that by and large?
I think we should consider including the yeses, or adding the yeses, that we like a broadening base for the ed fund though, too. Because there's
have a
a
resolution.
stability that could potentially be built into our ed fund that we really don't have right now as much.
We have a resolution concerning that, so we're already, she already
Yeah,
has
so I
that.
have, so when I was in Ways and Means, I said, these are the things that we would be looking for. We do support in, expanding the revenue sources. So I'll continue to say that, and definitely was somebody behind the scenes when Ways and Means was early on looking at that original proposal that eliminated income sensitivity. Like, this isn't gonna work. You're gonna hurt too many people.
What about transparency?
Show us the numbers, right, and sure enough, when they ran the numbers, it was not good.
Or maybe, like Laura Lee's, I think saying if you send out a legislative update to the school board members, but a part of a resolution that Nicole has been working on, the basic concept of which we basically would like to see,
Yeah.
whatever, just
Yeah.
a rhetoric
Yeah.
is what
Yeah.
I think we're talking
Yep.
about.
Don, you have something to say?
You know, I have found in my career that if you can explain something to people so they understand it, even those who may not like it will support it. And so anything they do, it should be more easily understood than what we have now. You know, it's all great about income and betting on income, property tax. And I own about 10 pieces of property, so I do a lot of non-residential stuff. And I'm not opposed to paying taxes. I mean, if it's going to take and help our young people. But when I have to go to a school board meeting and an information meeting, and people just have this glazed over look, and some of them are beginning to understand it in the last 2 or 3 years, it's like, hallelujah. And now we're gonna start, and that glazed look, and the people that are not 46, I think people are gonna figure they've got lied to, because there's gonna be some losers.
Yep.
Because of that, so
Yep.
it's gotta be more transparent, but it's gotta be something needs to be passed that a person on the street, if you can sit down with them for a couple of hours, one-on-one, they can understand it. I don't think this does it. I don't think this does it.
So it looks like we're pretty much on the same page. You feel good with that guidance?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So let's move on to the next
I
one.
have to say, I just wanna flag for you, that it's an election year. They are hoping to get out, early May, so maybe even before this board meets again. And my worst fear is that, a deal gets cooked up behind the scenes that we're not gonna be able to.
3 days before the end of the session.
Yeah, I mean, that's not outside the realm of possibility, and so, the Commissioner of Finance, Adam Gresham, was in the House Education Committee yesterday, and it was, back and forth between him and the committee that was like, you guys still don't have any idea what the end game is here. Neither side has a plan, and it's 3 weeks from adjournment. So I'm happy, I will continue to make the points, and just wanna alert you all that, it's possible stuff could go down at the end. Either we'll have a veto session, in which case a similar dynamic could emerge as emerged last year, in which during the interim time, a deal is worked out, and then they come back, they vote on it. Or we could have, I hope that doesn't happen, I hope that some kind of agreement emerges over the next week or so that school boards and other school officials have an opportunity to weigh in. But the time is ticking, and unfortunately, I'm not seeing good signals.
Historically, they oppose by Mother's Day in an election. Go back and look over the last
So let's
20
really
years.
quickly, 2 more things, and then we need to move on. Neil?
Yep, so one of my concerns is it sounds like from the way that things are moving forward, that we're not being given the opportunity to even present our viewpoint here.
We have not been invited.
We have not been
Even though I've
invited.
asked, when will we be invited?
Right, so, you know, I guess I'm concerned with the lack of the invite and wondering if, you know, is it worthwhile for those of us here to circulate with our board members back home to provide some input to their local legislators, since it doesn't look like the word at our coordinated level is
That's
finding
what
an
we did.
audience.
That's what we did, exactly that.
Yes, so I would like the opportunity to follow up with the chair of the finance committee and just say, you know, we would like to be heard. And if I get no response by the end of this week, then next week we can start.
Her daughter's a school board member in Swanton, Vermont. I sit on a board
Yes.
with her.
Yes, because I sent a note to the committee's scheduler, because she asked me to testify on a different bill, which I did this afternoon, and I was like, that's all great, I'll testify on that, but when are we gonna be able to testify on this? So, I assume she passed that on to the chair, but I don't know she did for sure. So I wanna follow up directly with the chair before we start bombarding the committee with, why haven't you heard from the VSBA?
Kim, last
I was
statement?
just gonna say, like, I know Logic doesn't really have much of an audience necessarily in that building, but like, the notion.
No
sorry,
offense, Martin.
Sorry, no, I'm sorry.
No offense taken.
I'm sorry. Except for Martin. But I do think we're in this predicament because of the one-time money they used last year. If they're going to make a major funding change that is only looked at for its implications in year one and not out year 2 and 3, I just am failing to see that this is taking the time and attention it needs to get, this is major. When did we do 1668? Like, a lot of years ago, right? 80s? 90s? I don't know, whatever it was.
Late 90s.
90s, right? So like, it took us a long time to get unification. These things take time, and this has not been thought through, nor has the evidence been presented that makes it compelling in this time frame. So, I don't know, good luck.
Okay. All right, let's move on.
So pre-K, you know, the House Education Committee has been working through the miscellaneous ed bill, which is where pre-K is. Up until this afternoon, they were willing to scrap the Senate's approach and were interested in putting together a study of expanding the definition of kindergarten to include 4 and 5-year-olds and having birth to 3 be early childhood, AHS, and 4 and 5 public schools. The Agency of Education testified yesterday, and Amy Fowler, and said, you know, we came to you, you asked us to give you recommendations, we gave you recommendations, you need to seriously consider our recommendations. So, which were the basis for the Senate bill, which we identified a lot of problems with. Feel like, in fact, it exacerbates some of the issues rather than addresses the issues that we raised. So, unfortunately, that language is back on the table in House Ed. So, I'm testifying there tomorrow. I thought I was testifying on kindergarten for 4-year-olds, but now I'm gonna go back and redo my testimony on the limitations with the Senate bill, which included the ADM change. So, just a refresher, it basically bifurcates the system, makes the Agency of Education responsible for processing all payments to both private and public providers, but has AHS regulating private providers, AOE regulating publics. It eliminates, the Senate version doesn't eliminate ADM altogether, but you have ADM for the students that you serve in your program only.
And we're not paying for the other.
And you're not paying tuition for the other kids. That's being taken off the top of the ed fund in voucher payments. But it severs the relationship between the school districts and the private providers. And it reduces the resources that school districts currently have to build those relationships and develop a system for pre-kindergarten. So it basically dismantles the notion that we would actually have a system of pre-kindergarten education.
There's an aspect of the bill that I don't understand, and it related to the ADM piece, and the way that I read it was, is that if you're a school district that offers the students in your school district care beyond the 10-hour, that you can't charge families back for that, but you do get to then count the ADM. Am I reading that correctly?
If you,
Which essentially would be taxpayer-funded childcare for the people that live in your district.
if you're serving the kids in your district, then you can, and be, for 20 hours. My understanding is what passed the Senate is you can count the .46 ADM and receive a $3,000 voucher payment.
But I can't charge the parents for the time beyond the, was it the, it's a 10-hour block, isn't it?
Well, the ADM is supposed to, right, the ADM is supposed to cover your costs, so is the $3,000 voucher.
So what if I offered 40 hours a week?
You still get .46 because.
You get .46 regardless of how many hours you
But I
offer.
can't charge the parents.
Correct.
For
I
the
mean,
care.
public schools can't charge parents for care.
Right.
Unless you had like a
Right, so I can count the ADM.
There had been language in various bills in the House Ed Committee at one time that would have allowed school districts to charge for hours beyond that. The House Ed is just starting to figure out what they're gonna do. First it was pre-K, or kindergarten's now 4 and 5-year-olds, now it's this, now they're working from the Senate version. So they may sort through all that, but my understanding is that most districts don't charge. Does your district charge for pre-K?
We don't even offer it right now.
Oh, okay.
I'm just
Yeah.
So
Trying
we offer aftercare, so it's it's part of community connections. So
Right.
you, depending on your means, you can pay, sort of what you pay after school care. You can either pay nothing. Or
But that's
you can-
another
But it's a
organization.
different organization
Yeah.
that does the aftercare.
Yeah, and they get the child, they get the
Okay.
subsidy money
Yeah.
and stuff.
But like if we were to, I mean, if my district were to offer 40 hours, I
Right.
get the money paid back to me for the 10.
Right,
I need to build into my budget then the
Right.
cost for the extra 30.
right,
So it's taxpayer funded, but I
Yep.
get to count the ADM.
right.
And the way we are seeing it
.46,
is like-
not
yeah.
1,
Right.
right.
So it's, I mean, okay.
Yeah, the current that's the current the current model does not incentivize full day
Yeah.
pre-K. Some of there's been Race to the Top grants and other resources that have been provided to districts to expand pre-K, but once that funding goes away, the districts are gonna have to absorb the cost of that.
Kim?
So, I feel as though what I saw to be problems in the original version of pre-K was the potential to exacerbate the divide because it was only reimbursing for 10 hours. Any version of this fix seems not to really pay attention to any of what I think we in the field felt the original problem was, and is administratively trying to parse out and destroy some of the relationships that have come to what helps us eventually realize the efficiencies from having partnerships with quality pre-K providers and continuity to anticipate our special ed needs by having those relationships. So I'm dumbfounded, again, I'm sorry, Maureen, but I'm just, you're taking it all today. I'm just, the problem that was identified doesn't seem to have a fix. Those that were not necessarily considered priority are happening, and I don't know why.
That's exactly correct. And that is the
Good
testimony
that I
that I gave
understand
in the Senate Education Committee. I did a little historical journey of like, these are the only reason you reviewed 166 was because our associations asked for that to be done. We identified these specific problems, none of which are solved by this approach. What this approach does is create a whole host of other problems and eliminate 3 years worth of work that's been done to build relationships. So, I'm going to continue to reiterate those points, but But it may be that I call upon some of you to send some emails to members of the House Education Committee. In fact, I would like to do that. Once I get in there tomorrow and really get a better handle on what they're doing, I'd like to do that. But it's tough to wrap our heads around because we have been assured by members of the House Education Committee for the last 4 weeks. We know what the Senate's up to. We don't agree with the approach. We're going to take a different approach. So to now be living in a world where that might not be the case.
Like form, I'm just trying, I'm not even sure I followed what the current approach is. Is it 4 and 5s or Ks and?
Well, that was an idea.
Yeah.
That was a concept that apparently they've abandoned.
Oh, well, that one at least sounded like that could make sense. It wouldn't make things worse.
Right. Right.
Give you
I
more
mean, we
funding.
were interested in that. We were interested in exploring how you do that.
Can I ask, like, who benefits from this? So the private, does anybody like this? Do private
The
providers?
Agency of
like this
Education
idea?
likes this.
Why? Because they don't have enough to do? They can't do a weighting formula, but they want to take on something else? I'm sorry.
Yeah, they like it because they have the responsibility for administering the program. It's no longer jointly administered. It's they administer the program.
Which is what they recommended, right?
Correct.
But
Correct.
didn't they want to administer the whole entire program?
Right.
Not just the 4 to 5s?
No, yeah, so they want the whole program, and that's what they have. They don't have, they still won't license private providers. CDD will do that. But they will administer all the contracts. I mean, they become, it's like a centralized contracting.
Where do they have the capacity for this?
And the law requires, the draft requires them to promulgate rules that would import all the regulations that apply to private providers to public schools, unless the secretary can make a case that those regulations aren't needed. So rather than dealing with 2 separate regulating agencies, schools do now for pre-K, you need to come in and license your program, and so AOE would just be doing it, but you'd have all of CDD's rules. It would just be an AOE person.
Didn't you say though that 3-year-olds were still going to be under childcare? So you would still have 2 agencies if you provide 3 and 4-year-olds?
No, it still would be pre-K is 3 and 4-year-olds. So it doesn't get rid of 3-year-olds.
Right, so
The
it's still 2
Senate-
agencies, what you're saying is.
Right,
yeah.
you still have to go through 2 agencies if you have a 3 and 4-year-old program.
You would not have to go through 2 agencies.
So
If
if
you're,
you do
if
the
you're
3-year-old
pre-K, pre-K is 3 and 4-year-olds.
Okay.
So if you're running a pre-K
I
program
thought you
in a
said 0
public
to
school.
3. Where?
That was an earlier.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Idea, sorry.
We should- we should
So
leave-
I'm sorry. That
We
was
should
the
leave this
original
topic, because
concept.
the more we talk about it, the more confused we're getting.
So, I mean, our position was in the Senate, and is that nothing is better. Like, you didn't solve the problems we asked you to solve. Don't make new problems by passing this law. So I'm gonna stay the
I
course
just
on that.
Get a cynical that when I brought this up, and I think I shared this with you at this was our full board meeting, so
Yeah.
5 towns were there, and I wanted their input, and Bill was very clear, so you might want to talk to him directly, that this was better for us, so he didn't want anybody going, because that preschool is a big issue for
Yep.
all of us, because we've been doing that for so long, and he said, this is better for us, if you're gonna do the 20 hours, we know that 20 hours is best practice, we're gonna make, it's gonna help us with our tuition. Yeah, our equalized pupil spending too. So I just want to share that with you, and not all of our schools have the capacity, just some of our schools have the capacity, so it won't be equity
Right.
based either, but that's sort of the advice that we.
Yeah, so, and I don't know if that was in response to the earlier proposal in the Senate, which had, you got a $3,000 voucher. They've changed it, so I'm not sure. In the original proposal, there were winners and losers.
Yeah.
right? So some districts were like, wait a minute, this is great. We can draw down more resources to expand the number of hours. But there were others where it would lead to a significant tax rate increase and not be useful. So our position was, when you're doing all these other things to the funding formula, like don't do this piece. But we did represent that there are winners. It's not universally terrible, but it is changing an element of the system that is not well understood, and they hadn't heard from business managers about it.
Okay, we should probably move on.
Yeah.
Unless someone's got to burn anything to say about it. Does Nicole sound like she's still running our course?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So special education. So special ed funding, the 897 funding bill, unanimously passed the House, which was quite something. It's now in the Senate Education Committee. They're making some changes to the bill, but nothing terribly concerning. What they have done that's concerning is attach, this should be S229, S229, the special education at independent schools, to the special ed funding bill. So that has a couple of effects. One, S229 is, really needs to be vetted by the House Education Committee. If it gets tacked on to a bill that's already passed the House, it'll go to conference committee potentially without ever having really gone through the House committee process. So House Ed just started today to take some testimony on 229, but it's sort of an end run around that committee. The big problem with how the Senate is framing the discussion is, so special ed funding is moving over time to a census-based funding model for special ed, where the resources you get are a factor of both your poverty and other demographic features, but also the number of students you have. It's intended to reduce not reduce, but level off the special ed allocation funding over time. They are proposing to allow the independent schools to continue to use a reimbursement model. So for my friends at the Bennington Rutland Supervisory Union have raised the alarm, and they were in the committee today explaining why that's so problematic. Senate Ed would not hear from them, by the way, but House Ed heard from them. Senate Ed said, we're done on 229, even though anyway. So they were in the House Education Committee. It was a little awkward because the House Education Committee hadn't even walked through 229 yet, so they had no context for the testimony that they were receiving. Yeah, and the superintendent and special ed, or an assistant superintendent, were on fire about this, because what it does, if you say to public school districts, okay, your funding around special education is going to look differently, and it's intended to drive changes in practice that move away from one-to-one aids and more resources devoted to tier one instruction. If independent schools are not under that same pressure to deliver services differently, and they are using a reimbursement model, then they will eat up the allocation to the LEA at the expense of the public districts. It's a math equation, frankly, and so it's troubling that the Senate Education Committee did not take that testimony, because they seemed confident that it was a good idea to run both models simultaneously. It's a terrible idea.
So what was their reasoning? Do you have any idea what they were thinking?
Not really understanding, and having a belief that, well, maybe they do understand, in which case that's worse. But I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt. They not really understanding how those systems work, not hearing from people affected by this type of a change. but also, it was talked about as though it was a pilot. Like, we'll pilot it for the public schools, but we'll keep this other model for the private schools. I mean, it just doesn't make sense. And what it means is, as resources get tighter with the goal of changing the way we deliver special education, but if that only happens in the public side and not the private side, the public side will bear the cost of increasing costs of the private side. So we're gonna continue to bring in folks from systems that would be impacted by that approach. Unfortunately, because they had no context for that conversation, and the committee on the House side is so committed to all the work they did on the census-based model, their initial reaction was, let's just drop 229. Like, let's just wait until the funding model goes through and save this other stuff for later. And, I had a conversation with a rep today where she sort of floated that, and I was like, I see your point, but I have a hard time saying about a civil rights issue. Like, we're gonna hold off until we get this other piece figured out. And so, anyway, that promises to blow up, I think, over the next not too long.
Maybe they should.
Three things. Don just suggested that maybe they should
wait
just
till I
go
get to
home
the next one.
so far.
We got at least 4.
Anything with
And, Clarence.
Oh, yeah,
is
yeah,
all-
that one.
I guess I look at this special ed a little different. I'm just a simple person. And when I see how much money is gonna be saved by this new model, a red flag goes up. Oh, my local property taxes are gonna go up to make up the difference. To pay this, because it's still, the services gotta be offered, they gotta be paid for somehow. And if the state's gonna save a bundle of money, somebody's gonna pay for it someplace. Guess what? That's local again. It may not be that simple, but it sure smells like a rat to me.
So I have shared that concern. And that's why we really strongly recommend, special ed administrators and superintendents believe that this is a better model. The UVM study supports that, the DMG study supports that. What I've said is, that's all fine and good, we need to take a long time, and we need to have an advisory group with expertise and boots on the ground to inform what the rates are gonna be, what the weights are gonna be, and have this thing play out over a 5-year period as the UVM study recommended. So, there's also protections under federal law for maintenance of effort, so they're not gonna, the first initial blushes were like, we're gonna just start to cut the special ed allocation. They understand they cannot do that under federal law. And so they're not looking to cut special ed, but they are looking to not see the allocation increase at the trajectory it has been. You're right. If we don't figure out how to deliver services differently, this has been our talking point, the funding model supports current practice. If you want a different practice, you need to have technical assistance. There's 3 positions for the Agency of Education to support changing practice. We would not have supported it without those positions and without the 5-year implementation timeline and a group of folks on the ground to advise about the process. Your concerns are absolutely on point. It doesn't mean we shouldn't do something, but it would be watching very carefully.
So, I'm trying to remember one of the things that the H897 included students who did not have IEPs, right? And then when it first got to the Senate, they didn't like that, and they didn't, it was all too fuzzy for them, I guess, for lack of another term.
So they wanted to have a threshold amount, so when you move from the reimbursement model means you need to document every 15 minutes a special educator or a paraprofessional is spent implementing IEP services, and link those back to an IEP. If you have that individual working with a student who's not an IEP, that becomes a non-reimbursable expense, right? So it really ties your hands in terms of the professional resources and how you can use them. The census-based model says, you know, first of all, under federal law, you still have to deliver these services, to Clarence's point. You're not off the hook on delivering the services. We're just going to give you some more flexibility in how you do it. And if you want to include some other students who aren't on an IEP but who are struggling with that literacy specialist or right, you can do that. What the Senate was talking about doing is saying we're going to require a certain, at least 30% of the census grant that you receive has to be spent on students with IEPs, which, you know, muddies the whole waters, because then you've got to document how you're spending those 30%, so sort of, you know. So I'm not sure, I haven't been in the committee in the last couple of days. I don't know if they've talked about that recently, Sue, when you were in there, in terms of, there's been some back and forth with the agency around language that's sort of, you know, can we keep reiterating federal law requires you to deliver the services. You're not off the hook in delivering the services. You can't put a roof on the building with these services. Like, can you say it enough in the law to add assurances to family advocates who, you know, are worried that this isn't, you know, now you get a grant and you can spend it on whatever you want. So that's the negotiation that's happening right now. I'm not sure exactly where they're going to land on that. But if it's different from when the House did, then they're going to have to hash it out in conference committee.
Okay.
But aren't there gonna be losers in that process too? With this new census model, when you look at some of the really small schools, and 3 kids move in.
It's possible. That's why I've said repeatedly, you need to model what any new impact, what any new formula would have, and adjust the weights accordingly so that this doesn't negatively impact smaller districts. Yeah.
That's one of the things I've been hearing in Franklin County.
Mm-hmm.
Well, given that, correct me if I'm wrong, but since we're paying for special ed from the SU budget, that kind of minimizes that real big hit to the small districts.
It should even it out, but you still may see that we have some small issues.
Any other thoughts about this matter? Okay, let's go to the next fun thing.
Is
it like this every year?
This is
Particularly
sometimes it's worse.
Particularly. I don't know that I've seen it worse, but
Well,
this is
no, sometimes it's like the 883 and Act 46 and things like that. There was a lot more pressure. But it was
yeah, but that was one bill.
focused in one place.
That was one bill. So the NEA came out on Monday with a press release announcing that over the weekend they had a delegate assembly where they, their members approved moving to statewide school employees' health insurance. The details of that proposal are fuzzy. So I met with I asked Jeff Fannin to meet with me today so I could better understand what they were proposing. And he didn't have answers to some of my questions, many of my questions, but I can share with you what he told me. It sounds like the original concept was to eliminate VHI. For some reason, they are making VHI the focus of the problem, and the fact that they don't have equal voice on VHI is why we have the problems that we have. And I said that, anyway. So create a commission that has equal representation. Their proposal has the governor appointing 5 and the NEA pointing 5, and I said, that's not gonna fly. But, equal representation of theoretically of management and labor, that this group needs to design the plans, have one plan. This group picks the plan, picks the sort of the design features of the plan, and then sets the premium share and the out-of-pocket share. This is where it got a little fuzzy because it wasn't clear. He said it was sort of like the teacher's retirement system. So the teacher's retirement system has a board. They pick the plans that are going to be offered in the health arena in particular. But the certain benefits are set in statute. So then he referenced statute. And I said, well, what's going to be in statute? And he said, we're going to march our way to 80-20 for all employees, and we're going to use income sensitivity to make that work for support staff. So I said, well, how does that work? And who's making those decisions? Is that happening in statute, or is that happening with this group? So he didn't know exactly how that would work and how. So that's one question. Another question is, if you're seriously proposing the dissolution of VHI, then you've raised a whole host of questions, including what happens to the hundreds of millions of dollars that are in reserve, that are required to be in reserve when you're running an insurance pool, that belong to school districts. So if you're going to have some new entity take over the insurance products for school districts, you can't count on those reserves going to that entity. Those reserves belong to school districts. So he, hadn't thought about that. So that's so it's one thing to say, the regulatory status of VHI is going to change. It's no longer going to be an intermunicipal organization. It'll be some other type of entity, which would allow for equal representation on the board. That's one thing that we could talk about. It's entirely another to say VHI is going away and the assets of that organization are going to be, they would, I believe, need to be redistributed according to the bylaws. If the state had other plans, that would be an interesting conversation. So I don't know how the state takes over a private or membership organization and seizes their assets. So that's another area that needs to be explored. And then finally, what happens if this group can't come to an agreement? So they said they don't want it to be collective bargaining because it's not with their employer, so we're not going to call it bargaining because it's not bargaining if you're not dealing with your employer. I said, fair enough. How will disputes be resolved? You're having equal representation on a board that not only is picking the plans, but is telling school districts and employees across the state of Vermont what their costs are going to be. If you think that's going to be a smooth process, that is unlikely. And he said, well, for 20 years, VHI functioned with equal. I said, VHI was making very low stakes decisions. It was about the types of plans that were offered. It wasn't one plan that every school district had to offer employees and how much it's going to cost each party. The stakes have just gotten really high. A lot of different parties are going to have an interest. There's no way everybody's going to get on the same page without some clear resolution process. What you could have that group make a recommendation to the legislature and have the legislature figure it out, or you could do it like we recommended and have it be a bargaining construct that has clear timelines and resolution procedures.
I think you just flip a coin.
So he said, we're going to have to think about that. So I'm not sure. I do want to acknowledge the fact that that's a big step that organization took. So the approach I'm taking is a seek to understand and ask questions and urge them to put stuff in writing so that we can respond and, get me language. Let's put our cards on the table to see if we can figure this out. Rather than they're doing a lot of tweeting and stuff, like, stop that and let's work on the details of how this could work. So that was, I said I had a board meeting tonight. I wanted to better understand what it is they were proposing. So now you know what they're proposing. I think a lot more needs to be fleshed out, but that's what's on the table from the NEA.
Go ahead, Lauren.
If they've moved that far, then we've gotten somewhere, certainly. I was wondering if anyone, I haven't been here long enough to know this, if anyone has looked, in some states, the teacher's insurance is part of the state employees.
Mm-hmm.
Standard packages, both for retirement and their health insurance. Is that something that's been looked at all here?
Yeah, so 2 or 3 years ago, they looked into creating a public employees health benefit pool and modeled that. That would end up being, first of all, we've now made this big transition into, lower AV plans. So we were at 97, 98% actuarial value, we're now at 88%. So the costs have gone down.
Right.
So if we were to move back to the state employees, if we were to move into a system, theirs is what our plans used to be. So we'd be going back to a 97% actuarial value plan.
Never mind.
So that in and of itself. But then what was modeled at the time was when we were still all on the same plans, our employees tend to be healthier than state employees and municipal employees, just because of the nature of the risk is higher in certain professions. So it would have increased our costs, our overall claims, and our premiums would have gone up.
Any other thoughts or comments? You?
Has this generated any interest in any legislators?
So I checked in with the chair of the House Education Committee, who spent a lot of time on the committee, spent some time on health insurance the last week or so, and I said, what's going on? The NEA's at the table, or what are we doing? And he said, I don't know, there seems to be everyone seems to think a commission's a good idea, so it's likely something like that might work. And I said, well, can we get some is there language, is there, and he was a little vague about that. So I said, well, I'm gonna talk to Jeff Fannin, I'm gonna get some, try to get some questions answered, and I'll circle back with you. So I'm gonna touch base with him. So I'm just, what I'm worried about is another sort of something gets worked out that's not really gonna work. And then it's gonna be another 11th hour, when we've got all these other things to keep handling. So I'm really trying to encourage everybody, wonderful, we can have this dialogue, let's start to work it out. Because concept is one thing, and the details really matter.
Flo and then she move on.
Sorry?
I'm just curious, how did they arrive here? Because there was some many, they had a meeting, all the teachers did that?
So the NEA, they had a delegate assembly or some sort of meeting. I don't know if they do it every year in April, or if they called a special meeting. They've been working on a narrative that has, because future planning associates could not administer the HRAs, employees have been experiencing a lot of difficulty with these new plans. That's not a function of VHI. The thing that kills me is the amount of work that Laura and her team have done to facilitate this transition, and suddenly VHI screwed it up when it was future planning, and frankly, the negotiated agreements that were so complicated that, future planning shouldn't have said they could manage, but the complexity didn't help with that transition. And so, the message to the members is, we've been getting the short end of the stick because we don't have equal representation on this board. That's why things have gotten so far off track. We're on these terrible plans that are bad, and so the only way and, frankly, the Health Benefits Commission took a lot of testimony about the inequities in plans available to employees. And I think it becomes difficult for the union to defend a system that has some employees have this coverage and some have that. So I think it was both the rollout hasn't gone well and people are feeling like this is a mess and they're being told that the solution is to get rid of VHI. And the inequities in the benefits makes the case for we should all have the same benefit. And they believe that, it's like VHI's been doing this, but they somehow think that if they have an equal voice at the table, somehow VHI is, or whatever the entity is going to be better able to control healthcare costs. But not through high deductible plans, through some other, not through plan design, I don't think, through some other mechanism.
What was very sad, just as a comment,
Yeah.
NEA sent out a notice to their people saying that one of the ways that they could control their costs because of future planning's debacle was to pay attention to where they bought their pharmaceuticals and whether they should use generics, all of the things that rollout was supposed to do. That's what they were suggesting to their membership.
And they're having to find it.
All right, we should probably move on here.
Some good news.
Good.
Some good news. We met with the Agency of Education, Sue and I met with the Agency of Education and representatives from the Coalition for Ethnic and Social Equity Standards in Schools this morning to hammer out some differences that we had on H794, which is going to be pulled into the miscellaneous ed bill. And I believe we have an agreement, and I think it's going to be a positive development. Basically, it sets up a 3-year timeline. For the first year and a half or so, the coalition is focused on a review of standards and curriculum and making recommendations to the state board about how to address some gaps in the standards, and then turning their attention to implementation supports for school districts. So the fact is that our curriculum and instruction and standards do not always give voice to the experiences of non-white communities, and that's a problem. And so this group is coming together with representation of those communities to do that review and have a conversation about how do we make sure that we're telling everybody's story when we teach students. And that is going to lead to conversations in schools that may reveal some biases, some beliefs that teachers need to feel comfortable facilitating those discussions and intervening where necessary and modeling compassion and empathy and learning and curiosity about difference. So they were hoping to pursue a policy mandate that we felt was not the best approach. It may be that that's something that comes out at the end as a recommendation, but we were hoping for a review of the current policies on harassment, hazing, and bullying to see whether those policies could be improved. And more importantly for me is, what are the tools that we can give to educators to support them rather than say, here's a new policy, go forth and make it happen. So I think, I think it was a good outcome. So we'll see. I haven't seen the actual language yet, so everyone was sort of reserving the right to to disagree once language came out. But I will share the language once we get it. Anybody have any questions about that?
Resources attached to it?
No, the people who are on the working group will be compensated for their time. Unless they're people like me, who, that's my job.
Nicole? So, yeah, resources, it made me think of the McGraw-Hill textbook in high school for AP US history. Those are not cheap, and they're rife with, yeah.
Right. So I think from, my interest in sort of dividing the work between like, first let's focus on the gaps in the standard, then let's focus on what supports need to be in place to implement.
Okay.
Rather than saying, we're gonna have a policy requirement that mandates that you do all these things. Just sort of taking a more, and I think, frankly, this group coming together and reviewing the standards provides a really great opportunity for people to understand each other's perspectives and learn more. And then you can get, without having it be really high stakes around this policy language or that policy language or this requirement or that requirement. So to have that learning occur together, I think both from the coalition's perspective and from the school administrator's perspective. Like, I think there's information that can be shared both ways, and I'm hoping is actually going to lay a really good foundation and model how you have these discussions.
Last question, so did that coalition also include teachers? Because at the beginning, that was not part of that?
So,
Just because understanding standards is complicated?
right, there's language, so the Agency of Education had recommended some language that some of it was accepted, some of it wasn't by the coalition. So I think there wasn't a problem with a requirement that the people who are selected have expertise in education.
Some.
Or is it, right. And I don't remember all the organizations that are named, but the NEA may have a seat on it.
All right, moving on.
Okay, school safety assessments and resources. So, governor signed 3 gun bills into law today. Thank you, Representative Alon, for
Way to go,
your
Marty.
leadership on that.
So they did something, Celeste.
A little love now, a little
That's
love.
right, that's right.
Really proud to compensate for
That was an unexpected turn of events, and shows you the power of youth voice, frankly. At the same time, the school safety assessments have been conducted. They are not planning to release the results of those because they don't want to advertise some of our weaknesses, but I'm going to request a meeting with, I have requested a meeting with VSBA and superintendents and principals just to understand what's already happening. I know VSBA has some resources and grants available. The House budget passed some money for school improvements. We're then going to try to meet with Rob Evans and the Commissioner of Public Safety to understand more about the school safety assessments and how resources are going to be provided to districts and on what basis they will be evaluating grant requests. So I'm trying to just piece together that information so that if a bill passes this session where there are $4 million in grants, I can communicate back to school boards what that means.
I have a question. They're not gonna release them to superintendents or school boards?
They may be doing that, they're not releasing them to
The
the
public would
general
be
public.
absolutely foolhardy.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
But,
yeah.
one of the things that we've talked about in our area is right now, we have local boards who can act relatively quickly with capital improvement money and capital construction money. But come July 1st, that all comes to a screeching halt when we become a whole new district that's gonna, because it's so new, is obviously gonna take longer to make decisions and implement and take action. So I asked our representative to please get those assessments to our principals and boards so we can do something that we've been doing for decades, addressing school safety issues, which suddenly the governor and the legislature seem to think is important, but, you know, I don't mean to be sarcastic, but it really is true. They want to stand a person in the doorway to stop people from coming through, when in fact that doorway may not withstand a heavy windstorm like 2 weeks ago, because the building is in poor repair. So it would be nice to get those assessments.
Right, so I am following up with Rob to figure out what exactly the process is around that.
Please, please.
Lorraine?
I think it would also be good for them to consider reimbursement of districts who were proactive over the last 2 years. Because they're coming upon it now, but some of us have been.
Good luck on that one.
Yeah.
No, I know, but I mean, within the
Makes
session.
sense. Good luck
I mean,
with
we
that.
just, literally in the last month, we decided to go do all the glazing on the glass, all the safety stuff that you put on the glass so it won't shatter.
Yeah.
I've been doing that too.
That's it.
Any questions about that one? Any more comments? All right, so, strategic plan, monitoring report,
That's where we.
go ahead.
This is
Yeah.
on the same vein as the school safety.
Yeah, yeah.
Somebody passed on a Vermont Digger article that was talking about the Senate is talking about having resource officers and making that some legislation. I don't see any, I only perused it. Is there anything, you hear anything about?
So there was a concept that was floated, and I don't believe it's gonna move forward, to allow retired law enforcement who are certified under federal law to conceal carry, to be able to be employed in school districts. I had a lot of concerns about that, that I talked through with some of legislators who were thinking about it, but didn't really get to a point where we were gonna testify because the legislator who was proposing it testified and I thought did a pretty good job of making the case against.
Yeah, that's what it
Talking
sounds
about
like.
undercover janitors and stuff, so, so I don't think that that's still, part of the mix. The Judiciary Committee pivoted to restorative justice. Which I've been assured by the agency just makes more work for the agency, not us.
All
I'm
right.
not too worried about that one.
So moving on, the strategic plan, this part here, for those of you who are new here, this is a sort of a snapshot of what the staff's been up to. This is more or less a chance for you to ask questions about what the staff's up to. If one of the staff members wants to plug in here and point our attention to something they've done, this is also a good time to do that.
Just wanted to make sure you noted at the March State Board meeting, where they also talked about small schools grants. They were talking about their calendar for the state plan. And I asked to speak because their calendar did not have them adopting the state plan until the end of November. And I reminded them that during the other phases of Act 46 implementation, when there was a sense of urgency to get the work done, they doubled up on meetings so that they could get the work done and allow districts to meet their obligations in terms of warning votes, et cetera. And that if the state plan is going to order mergers, the more time they can allow folks on the ground to do their work, the better. So they, it was sort of, hadn't occurred to them that that would be helpful. So they appreciated that input, and then they revised their calendar so that they're, I believe, expecting to adopt the plan at the end of October. So gained another month. So that happened. To Dan's point about the small schools grant, we can talk about that briefly
Yeah, no,
now
it's,
if you want to.
yeah.
Act 46 and then Act 49 require the state board to develop metrics for determining geographic isolation. So Act 46 states that small schools grants as of FY20 will no longer be available to districts that receive them unless they merged, in which case they were converted to a merger support grant, or the district can demonstrate either geographic isolation or sort of academic excellence and efficiency. And so there was a lot of interest in the board getting, so Act 49 required the board to sort of get them jump on that in terms of defining geographic isolation. They appointed 2 board members to sort of try to figure that out. And then those board members came back to the March meeting where they had a fairly winding conversation about class 4 roads, and it was not clear exactly where they were going. They did not make a decision, but I expect they will in the next. They have to, I believe.
By June 1st.
By June 1st, yeah. So I expect at the May meeting they will come down on a final decision, although the methodology and rationale is not clear to me. So that, we have not weighed in. We do not have a resolution on small schools grants. I believe the membership is not on entirely on the same page with respect to continuing those, so I have not weighed in. You can discuss whether you want to do something different.
Yeah?
Can I throw out, I just drafted up a thing here, I'll throw this out if nobody's interested, that's as far as it goes. This does not begin with whereas, but it begins instead with because, but you'll get the point. The idea is, because small school grants often support our most rural and vulnerable schools, and because small school grants amount to a tiny portion of the total ed spending, VSBA requests that the formula for dispensing small school grants not be changed. Or I guess I should change that, for the formula for determining geographic isolation, which was actually formulated back in 2011, not be changed. In other words, that they not come up with all of these metrics that you were talking about, class 4 roads, but just use the 2011 figures to determine geographic isolation. I think the number of schools after merging that will be eligible for small schools grants, it was 45. Of those, probably half or more are going to merge, so it's going to be, you're talking about 20, 25 schools that will be out.
What are people's thoughts about?
So I just want to be clear, the 2011, so there is, the law requires small schools, eligibility for small schools grants is determined by law currently in terms of the number of students you have per grade or per school. The 2011 was just a report from the Agency of Education saying this is our best estimate of what school, so, they used a certain methodology, but that So what you're saying is the methodology that the Agency of Education used in 2011, which I couldn't report back to you what that was at this point, because I wasn't prepared for this conversation, but.
Well, it's actually, the thing I'm referring to is just a geographic isolation metric that was developed in 2011, and it lists whether a school is or is not geographically isolated. And so they've been using that for the last 8 years now, 7 years now, and now they're talking about a newer one.
Well, they haven't been using it for anything. I guess that's my point. It was a report that the agency put together in 2011, but it didn't really mean anything because small schools grants were defined by statute. It was, I guess, intended to inform the legislature about which schools were potentially geographically isolated. Now it means something.
So we don't have much time, but I think we have enough time to have a little discussion on this and to see if they need to make a decision June 1st, which gives us time to weigh in the May meeting.
It does, although depending on when they make it, if they make the decision at their May meeting, it might be good for them to have the feedback from this organization if we're going to pass this along. We should do it sooner rather than later, I guess I would say.
Okay. Where are people at with this, Celeste?
I think it's a very timely topic. They have changed the name of small schools grants to merger support grants, which tells me they're gone within the next 2 years, because once you've merged, you don't need a support grant anymore. Right? I just don't have a lot of faith in the government continuing to support our small rural schools. I don't know about the vulnerable part in your wording. I'd love you to send it to me electronically so we can wordsmith it a little bit, because I don't feel like my school is vulnerable, except for losing that money would put us in a really bad position.
Yeah.
But I think it's important that we support those. When I hear the governor say he wants to close small schools because they're not economically sound, what I came to realize is he's talking about schools that are within a 3 to 5 mile radius. And that is not what our small schools are. So I really think we should look at it and give him our 2 cents on what is an expedient use of our dollar.
Thank you.
And if I can point out too, that if you use the 30-minute metric that they propose, now I don't know, there would be some balance of the other 7 criteria, but if you just went with the 30-minute travel time between your school and another school of a similar structure, Canaan, Vermont is the only town that would qualify for geographic isolation. So it's going to become complicated. It's going to be, is it going to be transparent? I don't know.
And is it during the summer or during mud season?
Kim?
I just pulled up this Google search, like the geographic isolation. I'm not sure what we're referring to, I think, with the previous metrics, but what I'm understanding the criteria to consider is class size, capacity in the surrounding area, the length of drive time and inhospitable routes. And so is that the piece we're talking about them defining? Okay. And I guess I wouldn't feel informed to have an opinion on that without knowing what's being referred to as their current metrics on that, but I am in support of the notion that it should consider all of those things that they laid out as they're trying to construct where small school grants remain in place, because I think it's important for the educational opportunities for kids that we not necessarily be continuing to put dollars if there's opportunity for there to be collaboration that creates a better experience for kids.
So Nicole's just whispered in my ear that the state board meets the 3rd week of May.
Okay.
So we will meet before then. So given what Kim said, can I suggest that we put this conversation off, get this on the agenda for the May meeting, get some supporting materials out to everybody so everybody has a chance to think about it. If you have a chance to go back to your home boards, ask them what they think about it. And then we'll come back here in May. Does that make sense?
That sounds great.
Thank you.
What if in the meantime, there were people here who wanted to have kind of a quasi-subcommittee, whether they did it by conference calls or email sharing, so that we just don't go for 30 days with not much happening unless that people who are interested in this might be identified and set up a working group.
Celeste has already asked
Yeah.
that I send it to her. It's not digital at this point, but I can probably turn it into such. If anybody wants it, just get in touch with me. I'll send it to you. We wordsmith the thing not as a board, but as a small group of people and come back.
That'd be my suggestion, not as an official group of the board, but if you guys wanna put something together.
But I think it's
fine.
important if that happens, and I would have some interest in it, that Gio and Nicole are kept
Informed.
by the message is going to them, and whether they share it with Susan or whomever, so that when we come here, there's been some discussion and kind of filter things out. I mean, Nicole may see something in the first discussion that is a red flag, and we should know that.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we're going down a path where there's gonna be a stop sign at the end, so.
Yeah, and I think there's a serious consideration here too, that where does our membership stand on this? We've never talked about this. You know, is this gonna be one of those things that causes people to go up in arms? I don't know. I actually don't know the answer to that.
Usually what happens when this has been discussed for the last decade, the people who are gonna win don't wanna change it, wanna change. People who are gonna maintain wanna keep it, and those that never really qualify, they could care less, they'd rather have the money somewhere else.
Yeah.
So it's gonna be a political battle.
All right, so back to the May meeting, that'll go to the May meeting. So, anything else on our strategic plan?
I have one point from my end of the state is the training session for new board members is scheduled for sometime next week.
It's been rescheduled until the 30th.
Or the one from Rutland?
Yes, that has
Okay.
been.
I didn't see that. Because that falls in school vacation for us in the southern end of the state, and that has always been
That was an
tough.
oversight on our part. We discussed it.
Because we differ from the north on when the vacation is, if we could,
It
be
is-
sensitive to that in the future, it'd be great.
School vacations around the state are now on our internal VSBA calendar for
But the
That
other
won't happen again.
The other thing to remember is
Perpetuity.
that some board members have said to us that they'd rather have it during break because they don't have the sports that their kids go to and they have more time during
Right.
that time.
We had,
So-
in fact, we had back-to-back scheduled originally, Rutland and Windsor. Windsor were leaving because they wanted it there, but Rutland were moving.
All right, so we have to hurry here, because I
Yeah.
get yelled at if I'm not out of here in 3 minutes.
So we had, we have a lot of offerings this spring. I think, you know, Susan's been doing a great job getting out there, putting together some great trainings. We're disappointed with the registration numbers. So one thing we want to sort of put a teaser out there is we're talking about the approach to board development, and we'd like to suggest the board set aside some time at the retreat in June to really weigh some options that we're gonna think about on our end in terms of how we boost participation in VSBA offerings. So, but certainly not for lack of trying. Another additional opportunity, we're gonna send something out soon. It went out through superintendents earlier this week. We are doing the joint board chair superintendent training on May 23rd. I think it's gonna be a really great day. We've got some good stuff lined up, including folks from district management group to talk about their findings on delivery of services to struggling students, which is one of the pieces underlying the move to new funding model for special ed. So definitely put the plug out there. And then wanted to remind you all that historically the June meeting is the time we reserve for the board's retreat, and we have it during the day. So it's typically between 9 and 3 or 9 and 4 on June 13th. Location, we've been having it at the Three Stallion Inn, but they've sold it to a private boys' school. So I've asked Carrie to look into some options.
I suggest doing it in South Royalton.
VSBA, we've had our retreat at VSBA's offices before. That's certainly probably the most affordable option for us.
It's a
And
nice room.
close, it's a nice room, we've got whiteboards. So unless I hear people,
Windows.
I mean, there's windows, there's no pool for us to just stare at while we're trying to do work.
Or horses
But we
running.
can, yeah, but we can make sure we get some good food, for you guys, and it is available
that?
on that date.
Where is that?
It's just
Up the
up the
road.
road in Berlin,
Berlin.
it's right off the
Right off the
interstate.
2 miles up the
I'll
road.
send you all,
Up there.
we'll
It's
send you
really-
all
really
the
easy to get
details.
And I also just put in a plug for this Saturday at the Capitol Plaza. We've got public agenda coming to facilitate a workshop on community engagement and effective governance, and that's the kickoff for the grant from the Nellie Mae Foundation, so
If you're interested, let me know tonight, because
we gotta give them a head.
I already gave them the head count, so I'll have to add to it.
Yeah,
Kim?
but
I'm just gonna put another plug in for the board superintendent, or board chair superintendent training, that with the unified boards, I know at least on our board, we, agenda plan with our superintendent, the COO, the chair and the vice chair, and I think other boards do it with their entire executive committee. So I think if it were to be sent out to invite those who are involved in planning for the year on your board, to include chair and superintendent, but then that has been our case for like 2 years now, or a year and a half, however long we've been doing this. And I think that's not unique to us, because I know MU does it as a little subcommittee for planning as well. I just think as we have fewer boards, that we used to have chairs from each of the boards within an SU,
right.
hearing the same message, and the likelihood of having there be some action out of that when it's heard by more than 2 people is probably impactful.
Okay.
Any
I know
questions?
it's not legislated, but
Yeah.
I think it's good practice.
Yep.
Any questions about the quarterly financial report? Kim, do you have anything to say?
No,
In
I mean,
10
it was
seconds or
fairly
less?
straightforward, and it was on the agenda for last time around. But did anybody notice as they were eating their dinner and perusing the details that they had questions? There was really nothing that jumped out, even to have been reported last March, or March.
Any questions from anybody about that? Okay.
So I just wanted to say one more thing. We did file the amicus brief on behalf of the South Burlington board. I emailed, that's what I was emailing you. So you can read the 6-page or so brief. Again, that was done pro bono for us. I do want to talk about the Washington Northeast Supreme Court appeal. So you all had authorized up to $40,000 in expenditure that cost the organization close to $22,000. So we came in under budget. The result was disappointing, but at least we came in under budget.
1 out of 2 ain't bad. Does this mean we can have beer at the retreat?
No beer. No beer.
All right.
It'll be your parting act, that's what we're gonna do. We got a cake.
So we got already a couple agenda items for the VSBA board meeting in May. I'm not sure why it says discussion and possible board action.
Well, it's in the past, which now we've got lots of agenda items, so we don't need, sometimes we don't meet in May.
Oh, yeah.
If they've
No,
adjourned.
I think we're already meeting in May. I
Yeah.
think that's a done
Yeah,
deal.
yep.
Consent agenda, do I have a motion?
I move to accept it as written.
Celeste with a motion,
I'll second it.
and a second from Karen.
Kathy?
I'm sorry. Any discussion? None? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay? Any abstentions? Passes. Any other possible agenda items for the May meeting? This is usually where we might plug something in. Given that,
Do we want to follow up on the innovation zones at the May
Oh, we could
meeting,
put
or-
innovation zone.
that's already down,
Yeah,
already
we
have it
already have
down for the May meeting.
Really.
Already have it. All right, so given that, we can signal adjournment by standing.
Alrighty then.